Welcome back to the Hang and Hunt podcast. We have a good one today. We were talking about what topics we want to cover, and Billy had the genius idea of covering the 10 commandments of recovering a deer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's awesome because recovering the deer that we shoot is, I mean, it's important for everybody, but it is super important for us. I mean, we cannot risk having an unrecovered deer in the suburbs. And, that's something that we've always harped on, but that's really carried through to the way I hunt, the way I get my setup dialed. And I think it's something that we can really touch on and help people out with.
Sure, and it's not just about not taking risks and things like that. There are very specific skills and techniques that we use to ensure that we're recovering every deer, or at least, every deer that we possibly can. I mean, up in the, 95, 98% of the deer we shoot, we're recovering, if not every one of them. Now, we'll preface this with every bow hunter has difficulties when they're hunting, and every bow hunter hunting long enough, you're going to lose an animal, and that is an unfortunate part of bow hunting. But if you can minimize that down to the tiniest percentage, you're giving, bow hunters a better, I guess, light in public. But then also, even more importantly, you're doing everything you can to ethically kill these deer animals, and it doesn't matter what animal it is, from a squirrel to, up to a moose or whatever. So,
yeah, and you're shooting a live target.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff can happen,
Yep.
and all we're trying to do is help people figure out how to stack the odds in their favor as much as possible to help minimize that risk and figure out a way. And I mean, that's something that we do all the way from our bow tuning, our setups, all the way through to picking your shot and then ultimately executing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important for people to listen and kind of think through their setup and just be analytical and thinking, like, where do I potentially have voids here?
Sure.
Or what can I do better, right? And so, when we were talking about this, the number one thing that we both hit on right away is your equipment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the first thing that comes to my mind is your bow,
Mm-hmm.
and having it, having the strings on it, inspecting your actual equipment, getting it dialed as much as possible. And a lot of that you can figure out very quickly in a good tuning process,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So a tuned bow is absolutely number one. It's your arrows flying perfectly. You're getting the best penetration. You're getting the best accuracy. And you are the most confident in a very, very well-tuned bow. And that's also going to, I guess, equate to a good shot.
Yep. And I think, for me also, bow tuning, I taught myself how to tune a bow, mm-hmm. because I am insanely anal, and I never felt like I could go to the bow shop and have them put the effort into my bow that I wanted for it to run at that optimal level, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm looking to have a Formula One race car. You're not taking that to Jiffy Lube, right? Like that's not working on your car. So
and there are a lot of bow shops. We're not knocking bow shops at all.
Far.
Bow shops are fantastic, and that's where you need to go, especially if you don't know how to tune your bow at all.
For sure.
You absolutely go to your experts. And I'm not talking about big box stores that have a bow section. I mean an actual bow shop.
Yep.
That's where, look, those folks are trained by, for example, if they're selling Matthews, they have to be trained specifically on Matthews bows, how to tune them and how to tune them well.
Yeah, for sure. And though I think it's important to, for me at least, there was a lot of self-confidence that I got knowing that if I'm on a mountain somewhere, I can look, if I break something or something gets bumped around, like I know how it's working to be able to get it back operational. Or even if I like drop my bow, smash it hard, pulling up the tree and, Miss Susie's backyard,
mm-hmm.
I'm still able to look at it and I'm like, okay, well, I know.
Or if you let me
fine.
borrow it,
yeah.
then
If
you
you're
know.
anywhere, if you're within my 6-foot bubble of my gear, I know that
there's a potential for damage.
Yes, the Billy footprint that has been left on it. Although, the bow that you have right now, Taylor Coleman is the one who smashed that.
Oh yeah. Good for him.
He dropped a climbing stick on it from like 20 feet up in the air. And it was very karma-esque, though. We were in Missouri, and, I have like a detailed system for everything.
Yeah.
We're in Missouri on a trip for First Light last year, and for some reason when we got out of the tree, we're like packing up other people's stuff. Actually, I remember why. We had a Rambo bike, and Taylor had like 80 pounds of camera gear. So I took all the gear that I could, because he had just like a pedal bike. Loser. Oh, it was funny until my Rambo bicycle battery was frozen. They went from 88% to 0.
Yeah, because it was like 10 degrees or below.
I was yelling, Taylor, come back, get your camera gear.
This bike's heavy. I can't pedal it.
I'm leaving your shit here. But, yeah, so anyways, the next morning we got out, and we went in like deep into this area, and we get to the base of the tree, and I was like, hey, do you have my platform? He's like, yeah. And he hands me the platform. And he's like, where's mine? I'm like, I don't have one. So somehow we had like 8 Lone Wolf sticks. And so we made a ring of steps with climbing sticks for him to rest on. Poor guy. And coincidentally enough, one of those sticks coming out of the tree smashed that Vertex bow.
Awesome. It works very well now.
It does. It bent it right back to plumb.
But you being able to, address the situation, address the issues that it had, and fix it.
Killed deer that night with it.
And there you go.
But yeah, bow tuning, whether it be done by a professional, or you do it yourself, or you just get it done by a professional and learn the ins and outs of it, it's important to.
And understand it's not a one-time thing. Your bow, I know strings and cables don't stretch, right? But they do. They settle and stretch, and over time they wear, and that is a wearable item on your bow. So, just because you bought this brand new flagship bow last year doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to be in tune perfectly like it was at the end of the season last year. Yeah, especially after thousands of shots, right?
For sure. It's important, even after you get a brand new bow and you get it like out of the box tuned. After you put 300, 500 arrows through it, shoot it around, you need to constantly check it. Yeah. I mean, we're looking at, the camera can't see, but like my paper tuning stands down here, I'll shoot a couple arrows through that every once in a while, or just.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple new arrows in there right now that weren't there the other day.
Yeah.
So we're always testing, but
exactly.
And then number 2 after bow tuning is the other component that you're fleeing at the animal, and that's your arrow setup.
Yep.
And I look at an arrow as, just as important as that bow, because your bow never touches. Hopefully it never touches the deer. Throwing your bow at the deer. No, but that arrow, and it's not just the arrow, it's the entire component from your nock to your broadhead. And I look at an arrow as being, you want that combo to have a ton of integrity. That's number 1. I don't want it to fail.
Make up for our integrity.
Make up for ours, right? I want that thing to be rock solid and just a hammer, right? I want to have I like fixed blade broadheads.
Yep.
I like to have, like, we're running those day 6 arrows right now with that. The insert's got that outsert on it too. Yeah. It makes it so tough. They're super tough arrows.
Something else on those arrows, not to cut you off, which I just did. They are super straight, because they're measuring the straightness of those arrows over the entire length of the carbon shaft. Whereas,
and what do they usually do? Like other manufacturers,
I think the standard in the industry is, I believe it's 17 inches. So the straightest 17 inches of the arrow. There's a big difference, but I mean that's a third of it.
Yeah.
Right. And a little.
Yeah.
So
it's half.
Yeah. Boy.
Damn it! I got that wrong.
Edit. It's about 1/16 of the arrow length. We're shooting them 98-inch arrows. No, but it's important, to have, because if you're picking the straightest section, you can get a skewed straightness, and so by having that full arrow be .001, I mean that's a straight arrow, and the spines are tighter. But yeah, so to your point, to have the straightest arrow you can. We also like heavy arrows. I think that, obviously there's a point of diminishing return on a heavy arrow, but we're both in that 550 to 600 grain area.
A pretty high FOC.
High FOC, like that 17 to 18% range, in a big fixed blade head, because for me, and we talked about this in one of our other episodes, but I want the most forgiving setup I can have. So all of that is geared towards forgiveness, because it has, if you think about throwing a string versus throwing a rock with a string tied to it, okay, well, that's FOC. If you start thinking about busting through stuff, I mean, how far would a dump truck go if a dump truck going 80 ran into a building?
Sure.
Versus a Ferrari going 80 hitting the building, or going 100, right? I mean, it has that momentum is pulling it through whatever it's hitting. And then a big fixed blade head, because I want to have the most forgiveness in shot placement.
So if you're off by, a half an inch, and you're shooting a, inch and a half, 2-inch cutting surface broadhead, if you're off by that fraction of an inch, because this is a game of inches, if you're off by that little bit, you're catching more vitals.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, gosh, it could just be like catching that one artery that you need to hit, because obviously the name of the game is putting a critter down, but for us, the difference in 50 yards and 200 yards is a big deal.
Yeah, it's still a dead deer, and it might have run another 10 seconds, but that extra 100 yards, that extra 75, that extra 150 yards means potential problems for us in the burbs.
That's the difference between being on the property of the CIA or not,
right?
Or being in a pool or not, right? I mean, there's some major negative repercussions to having a deer run further. And so, but then people hear that and they're like, well, why aren't you shooting like a big fixed blade expandable? And expandables are great.
Fixed blade expandable.
Wait, secret alert. I didn't finish my coffee yet today, so my mathematics are a little off, as well as other parts of my brain. So, yes, the old fixed blade expandable, a big expandable head. Is what I was trying to say there. That's what happened in my head movies, but my mouth movies were different.
Have you ever seen those buck blasters they used to use? It was like a big, almost looked like a big thunderhead, but then it had like these like huge Spitfire type of fold back blades on it.
I mean, over the top opening.
Yeah, and I mean, I think they opened up to like 2.5 inches. Plus,
Turkey
they
head.
had. I mean, it was just a monster, But anyway, yeah. So why do you go with a fixed blade head over a large
if
expandable?
You hit the shoulder blade, she ain't poking through that.
No.
I mean, it might crack it, but
and you might get through one and get one lung.
Yeah, but then again, you're back to the original scenario where it's like that's a major nightmare. Now, there are some spots that we hunt that are so small that I will shoot a big, like 2-inch expandable rage head, or the G5 meat. What's dead meat head. It's like it opens to 2 inches. But on those properties, I know when I have that head on my arrow, I'm not even shooting 20 yards. I'm shooting like 12 to 14 yards where the deer is quartered away, and I know there is as close to zero potential as possible to hitting that near side shoulder.
Yeah, and you're actually coming up on the very next number 3 would be shot placement.
Yep.
You mentioned that slightly quartering away in that broadside shot. And my preference on any shot, on any animal, any big game animal, is a slightly quartering away shot. I've taken them at all different angles, but that one seems to put them down the fastest. And, aiming for your exit, or what's your arrow going to go through, and then where do you want it to exit?
Yep.
If it's slightly quartering away and you're coming out, in the armpit or on that opposite front leg, that is a dead animal very, very quickly.
It's cleaned out. And the shot selection and shot placement is absolutely critical. I mean, like once you've gotten your bow dialed, you got your right arrow, you got a pretty heavy arrow that's not going to stop at bone. You got a broadhead that busts through bone if you accidentally hit it. Then being able to look at a deer and read that deer's body language and understand, okay, is this critter super spooked? Is it Do I have to make a noise to stop it? If so, that's going to cause the deer maybe to be more alert and drop a little more. All of these are factors that you need to take into consideration, and they're not like conscious thoughts really, but it's just something that subconsciously you pick up on over time. Because I think if you're looking at a deer and you're like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, that deer is like a 7 spooky, and I need to aim 3.6 inches lower, like you're gonna hate life hunting wise. But if you're able to just be like, okay, this deer's coming in, it's a little spooky, I'm going to need to take the first shot that I can on it when it's presented, in order to get a shot on it, because this deer's on a more high alert and I have more potential of getting pegged. Whereas, shout out Nick Yates. Yep. But, whereas if a deer is coming in and it's like just, Bob Marley deer, it's super chill and it's just hanging out and it's going to come eat all the acorns. It's like you have all the time in the world to wait for that perfect quartering away shot where everything's opened up. There's no potential for smashing the near side shoulder bone or whatever. So like first figuring out when to draw and take the shot, but then immediately after, exactly, the shot selection shot placement could not be more important. And aiming for that, I personally love to aim for the arrow's exit, because I feel like picking that exit point is the best way to put an arrow through a deer. And I like to have the arrow exit a third of the way up the body, like right behind or pretty much right through that offside leg. So if the deer, sometimes you need to come out just in front of it or just behind it. But like if there was a golf ball on a tee or on that offside, shoulder bone, like right where that big ball goes into the socket, that's where I'm trying to smash through with my arrow. And there's no scenario that if you don't put the arrow there, that it's not a 30-yard run and pile up snowplow type shot.
Sure, absolutely. And speaking about when you have deer that are quartering away harder, that can be a very, very lethal shot. And if they're quartering away pretty hard and you've got to put it back at that back rib, and we're talking specifically from a tree, right? So if you've got to put it back there, it's going to run up into the vitals, right? Yep. And that's a dead deer. It's not going very far, and that's a proven good shot. It's a little riskier because, there's a smaller window. But then when you so let's say you're on the other side of the deer, and it's a quartering 2 shot. I've noticed that from the ground, from a same plane as the deer, a quartering 2 shot, and I don't condone quartering 2 shots at all, but a quartering 2 shot, when you're on the same plane, can be as effective as a quartering away shot. The problem people get into is obviously that bone on that near side leg, and that's a big issue. But if you can get past it, it's usually a dead animal, especially if you're using the setup that we do. The other issue that people have is they try to take that shot from a tree, from an elevated position. And when you're not on the same plane as the deer, your entrance is above a lot of those vitals that sit a little bit lower. You mentioned the bottom third of the deer. If you're in an elevated position and you shoot it from that quartering 2 side, you're going up above. Your entrance is above that lower third where you want your exit to be.
Yep.
And then your exit is not hitting everything. It's not hitting double lungs. It may hit one. Usually, you'll get a lung, but it's going to come out that stomach. It's going to come out the pooch. Yep. And that's going to be a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely.
If you don't hit bones. So,
well, I think people instinctively try to aim behind that near side shoulder.
That's another one. Yeah. Especially if they're quartering 2.
If it's quartering 2 and they stick it and it's just a gut shot, if you're lucky, or you'll hit it like the hawk. I mean, the margin for error is so small on a quartering 2 shot.
It's not worth the risk.
No. If you're shooting an elk and an elk's coming in at like 10 yards, 20 yards, like smoke that sucker. You're on the ground. If you're in a tree and you have a quartering 2 shot, just wait. I mean, even if you're pegged, shout out Nick Yates. Even if that deer is looking up at you like, what are you, and giving the old foot tap dance, and you're at full draw, just wait.
Can you get lucky?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Our buddy Brian smashed a giant shot.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say, yeah, he got lucky one time.
3 times. Well, twice he was out of town. But yeah, I mean, you can get lucky, shoot him in the neck, and have a dead deer, and people are like, "Oh, look at this blood trail, it's great." So yeah, but if you think about how the shoulder blades sit inside of a deer, like that's their armor, right? Mm-hmm. That's why we have big shoulder blades. That's why we have a breastbone. Same thing for humans. That armor is set up to really not accept a quartering to shot very well.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
The shot process, the shot selection is very important to wait for that broadside quartering away, and even aiming for the exit. I think is the most important part of all that, because so often I see people try to aim at the crease or aim an inch and a half behind the crease or whatever, and I have a lot of people that I've helped try to recover a deer where you ask them, where is the deer standing? Oh, he was dead broadside. Where'd you shoot him? I hit him perfect. You're like, well, dude, if you hit him perfect and he was dead broadside, you wouldn't be calling me.
He would be 50 yards away.
Right.
Yeah.
And so often those deer are actually slightly quartered too, at like a 15-degree angle, and you just don't realize it. And guys will, if they're doing that, and you aim for just behind the shoulder,
you're coming out in the pooch.
Yeah, you're hitting them in the guts and the liver to begin with. You might get a tiny bit of single lung. But, I mean, I cannot count the number of times that I've been on a deer recovery that was a perfect shot, double lung, that was nicking the lung, its guts, liver. The guy pushed the deer too early, and that sucker is deep in wherever it went. So
one other, just a little piece of that also tricks people is they think that deer, when they're broadside or quartering away or anything, that their bodies are in a straight line.
Right.
But their spines curve just like ours do. Well, ours don't curve very much.
A bottle of bourbon.
Yeah, then it's all wavy, right? No, but especially if a deer's coming in and it's perfectly broadside and you and stop it, what do? They look in that direction.
Yes.
And when they turn their head towards you, it's
their
not
shoulders
just
turn,
yes,
but their hips are square.
Their hips, their
it's a
back hips are
semi-truck.
square. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just like a semi, and that front turns. Well, guess what? All the vitals are in the front.
Yeah.
The vitals are upstairs, so when they turn towards you, you instantly have a quartering too. So it's not the whole body of the deer that's broadside. It's the front half of that deer that needs to be broadside or slightly quartering
That's
away.
a great point. And I think a lot of people need to take that and just slow it down. I mean, one of the other things that we talked about is kind of that form and shot sequence, which we're going to get into, but you don't have to rush. And that's the big draw to bow hunting, right? Is like maintaining composure when you have the most insane adrenaline dump ever. But you have to just slow down and just wait a second. Because when that deer comes in and you go, meh, and it turns and looks at you, and then you're like, and you just dump the string.
Kelly Clarkson. Oh, God.
Nothing good is happening from that scenario. Okay.
No. And we're actually getting into we mixed number 3 and number 4. So number 4 is actually the position of the deer.
Yeah.
So we talked about the body position, but it's also the positioning of the deer in relation to you.
Yep.
Where you are in the tree. Is it on your offside? Is there brush there? Are there limbs there? Are there twigs? Look, I'm no Levi Morgan, right? So I need to make sure I've got as much room for error as possible. So I don't allow twigs to be on the near side of the deer when I shoot. I can't thread the needle that well.
That's why I got my new Excalibur crossbow that has 2 bolts. It's double cocked.
Have you seen that thing?
That is crazy.
I want to pull both triggers at the same time.
Check out our YouTube channel for some fun content comes in. No, but that's an important thing that you mentioned with the brush and everything. But also, I think so often people are only concerned about the ground distance from the tree they're in to the target animal, 18 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, whatever. But where you are in the tree matters as well.
Sure.
Your height off the ground, right? And, you see these guys on a lot of these saddle hunting forums and stuff on Facebook where they're like, oh, you're only hunting 20 feet. I'm hunting 30 feet.
You sissy. You can't get up 30 feet? I can do it with one stick.
Right.
I can do it with half a stick. Well, good for you.
With no stick. But, hunting elevated gives you an advantage over your animals. However, there is also a diminishing return because the higher you go, the steeper that angle is. And now, I mean, there's some scenarios where if you're like 25 feet, 30 feet off the ground to your chest, and that deer is at like 10 yards, it's very hard to get two lungs.
Yes. It's a very small window.
Yes, you're actually putting a handicap on yourself, more so than God already did to me.
Mentally this morning, at least.
Yes. Yeah, my math is great. I actually wrote 3 7 times down here. No, but
I kept track of the numbers for you.
Thank God. DeMatha versus O'Connell here. But yeah, I mean, to get way too high is not helping you out. And so, I mean, I think that we really like that, I like my feet to be at like 18 to 20 feet, right? And so that, I think, gives you the broadest angle, especially out to, 20, 25, 30 yards.
Sure. And if
I have bow hunting distance.
If I have cover, like if I have a tree that's tucked up with a holly all around me, I have really good cover, and it's only 10 or 12 feet off the ground, I'll take that over being above it and stuck out. So
why leave cover to get higher? It's not helping you out.
Exactly.
And even if it's 5, 6 feet off the ground, I mean, like if you're in the cover, deer are looking for movement. Now, granted, there's some scenarios where if you have topography involved and you need to be higher or lower, like that's totally fine. But for the most part, if you can get that cover scenario, like a cedar tree all cut out, I'll hunt 5 feet off the ground.
Sure.
I've killed tons of deer doing that. Yeah. You don't need to be 30 feet up to kill a deer.
You just need to be incognito.
Exactly. Quit moving around. So then next is your form and your shot sequence, and that has a lot to do also with what you're hunting out of, whether it be a tree, saddle, or tree stand. We're all hunting out of trees. Tree saddle or tree stand. Your form is important. Now, I've found that my form to be way better in a saddle.
Out of a saddle, absolutely, because I remember, back in like the early 2000s when I really started getting into bow hunting, my first 3 shots on deer, I shot over every one of them.
Yeah, high.
I'm like, what is going on? And my father's like, you have to bend at the waist. It's like, if you just drop your bow arm, and everyone's heard, don't drop your bow arm, bend at the waist so you keep that T form.
Yep.
With a saddle, you're already leaned. You're already leaning at that angle or close to it, so you don't have to bend as much. Now, I won't say you don't have to bend at all, but as much you don't have to bend.
And it helps that the saddle is locked around your waist. So for me, there's about 60 inches of fabric there, but it kind of locks you in. It makes you bend at the waist because you can't really bend any other way. So it I find that my form to be awesome out of a saddle, and then also part of that is the fact that when I'm in a saddle and a deer comes in, I don't have to worry about falling out of a tree stand. I don't have to worry about where my feet are or any of that stuff. Like, I know I can just focus on the critter, focus on making the shot happen, because I'm tied in.
Yep.
And you have that subtle, well, it's not subtle. I mean, you have that very solid positive reinforcement of, like, you're cool because you can feel your weight in the saddle. Like, you're just sitting there.
You're leaning against. It's not like even though when in a tree stand with a safety harness, you're not leaning against that safety harness. You're just standing on a platform. And if you fell, you're going to fall a foot or so and have a jolt. But with that saddle, that tether on the tree, you have that positive, force that's pulling you back towards the tree. So with the shot sequence, one, it's being comfortable in that and making sure, you see where the deer is coming in. I think on the last podcast you were talking about, I'm going to shoot the deer right there.
Yep.
I do that too. As soon as I see a deer coming in, a deer that I know I'm going to shoot, I stop looking at the deer and I start looking exactly where it's going and where I'm going to shoot it at, and then where I can draw.
Yep.
I always want to draw when the deer's not looking, when it can't see me, it's preoccupied, its head's behind a tree, whatever.
Yep.
And I get to full draw at that point. Once I'm at full draw, everyone on earth has had a little bit of buck fever. When a deer comes in, I don't, even if it's a doe, you can still call it buck fever. You get the adrenaline, that adrenaline dump comes and it can really screw you up mentally. You've talked about, any type of athletic endeavor going through your sequence, focusing on the sequence and the procedure as opposed to the outcome. one thing that I've done a lot to calm myself down, if I'm at full draw and I see its antlers or whatever it is, and my father taught me this. He said, stop looking. As soon as you know you're going to shoot the deer, stop looking at the antlers.
Yeah.
Look to where you're going to shoot the deer, both its position and on its body. The next thing that I do is if I start getting nervous and I start thinking about, oh, this is going to be a taxidermy bill, or, oh, I've got to field dress this deer, I'm wrecked, right? It ruins me. So I tell myself it's just another target.
Yep.
And then then once I tell myself that it's just another target, then I go into kill mode, and it's everything just slows down, calm. And when I shoot, it's almost like I don't shoot. The arrow just goes.
Yeah.
You know,
Subconscious kind of.
It very much is. What's the sequence that you go through when a deer comes in? Let's say as soon as it comes into range, I'm either at full draw or getting to full draw.
Yeah. So like when I'm in, when I flip the switch into kill mode, so I see a target animal, whether it be a buck or a doe, they're coming in, I make the decision to shoot it. Instantly you start getting that adrenaline dump. And for me, it's funny to hear your sequence because I do the same thing where I'm saying, I just keep repeating to myself, stay calm, pick a spot. Stay calm, pick a spot. And I'm just, it's not like a chant. I just keep saying that until I calm myself back down and kind of like get on top of it. And all I'm doing is I'm telling myself exactly what you are. It's another target. It doesn't matter if it's a spot. Like my dog very shortly might be a target.
I can hear him.
He's freaking out upstairs. Probably an ice cream man.
Again.
He knows what house to go to. But yeah, I mean, stay calm, pick a spot. Stay calm, pick a spot. And then once I'm looking at that deer, reading the body language, and I get to the point where it's time to draw, come to full draw, and then I just go through my process. And so my process, which we've talked about before, is I think of those old laser-guided missiles in the early 90s where, my pin is that laser guiding missile. And so I just, say in my mind, pick the exit, paint it. So in my mind, painting it is putting that little pin right on the exit. And then I just say, keep it painted while you pull, 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 pull. And I just repeat pull as I'm pulling, and then it just goes off.
It's gone.
Yeah, but I'm not thinking, you need to be confident because confidence is key. And you need to not get ahead of yourself because the second that you start thinking about that taxidermy bill or, oh God, I need to be at home at 7:30 and I'm going to have to field dress two deer now. Like, this is not going to work. If you start getting ahead of yourself and putting the outcome ahead of the process, you will have an issue.
You will have a problem. And the same thing that some people, they have a negative thought. It's like, oh, I hope I don't miss. I hope I don't miss.
Right.
You're getting ahead of the process.
Yes.
I hope I don't miss means you're thinking about, you've already shot in your mind. You've already missed. You've already shot.
Exactly.
And you haven't even drawn your bow yet.
Yep.
Right. So number 6, you make that shot. The arrow's gone. Once that arrow leaves, there's nothing you can do about it after that. Once it's gone, it's either a miss or it's a hit. And hopefully at that point, you've done everything you possibly could to make sure the hit is exactly where you wanted it. And sometimes it's exactly where you want, but like we talked about in shot placement, it may be where you want, but was it at the right point to kill the deer very quickly? So immediately after the shot, the very first thing that I do is I put my eyes on that deer, and I do not take my eyes off of the deer until I can't see it anymore. And you mentioned also listening for the deer, listening for sounds, listen for a crash, listen for a big splash like it jumped in a pool.
Yeah.
But you have to watch.
Shrieking from the neighbor.
Yeah. And when you look, you're not just passively watching the deer run away. You need to make active, conscious effort to see, okay, it ran right by that oak tree right there on the corner of the field or whatever, the corner of the yard. And it was on the left side, about 6 feet away. That's the very last spot that I saw that deer. And you do everything you can to memorize that spot.
Yep.
And the reason why is because sometimes you shoot a deer, a lot of times you shoot a deer and there's blood within 5 or 10 feet. sometimes there's not blood, especially if you hit them a little higher.
Yep.
There isn't blood for 40 yards sometimes. And
Yeah.
if it's thick vegetation, you don't see them. You need to go to that last point. That's where you have a higher opportunity to find blood than right at your arrow.
Yeah.
So,
I like to almost just look and listen fully without like thinking to myself, right? Because I'm just letting my brain absorb everything, right? So I'm just watching it run. You're watching how it's running. You're looking for blood. You're looking, you're making sure it doesn't have an arrow sticking out of it, kind of doing a wheelie. You listen for that crash. I love to watch their tail. If you see a deer run 50 yards and stop, and then you watch that tail is low and tight and it starts flicking really hard, that's a way better sign than up and flagging. There are all these little things, little pieces to the puzzle that are absolutely critical to recovering that animal. And again, just looking and listening, super important.
if you do shoot a deer and you think, oh, it's a perfect shot, and it looks perfect, everything about the shot, it was just executed perfectly, and you zap that deer and it runs off 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, and stops, and its back is hunched up, and it stands there for an extended period of time, that was not a perfect shot.
No.
That is 100% a shot back. It could be liver, which is better than full in the pooch.
Yep.
But that is absolutely back, no matter what your brain's telling you, no matter how good your shot was. If it hunches up and it stops, it's hit back. So you need to know these little,
And if you
signs.
make a perfect shot and that deer's standing there with its tail straight up and it's not hunched, and then it starts making, what did one guy call me? And he said it started barking at him. So the deer was barking at you. Like if it does that, you missed, right? And so just paying attention to all those things is really important. But assuming that you haven't gotten a hunched back, assuming the deer didn't stand there at 50 yards with his tail up or down, that deer tore off out of there, and you heard, some breaking of things and then silence. The next thing that I'm doing, or the next thing that I think is super important, is kind of thinking through exactly what just happened. The answers to those questions result in how long are you waiting to pursue the deer, right? And so what I'll do is, assuming that everything went well.
So this is number 7.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So your wait times and kind of how to follow up.
Yeah, wait times, how to follow up. And so I'm thinking through, okay, did the shot break how I wanted? How was the deer standing? How did the deer react when I hit it? Did it tear off hard? I'll take my binos out and I'll look for blood on the ground. I'll look for my arrow. Quite often I can see my arrow, and one of the other things that we're going to talk about is having your gear set up. So I like to have a big white wrap on my arrow with big white veins, and that allows me to see the blood. I mean, I can see it from the tree a lot, and I can see that there are bubbles in it or, whatever. And so assuming that everything went well with the shot placement, how the deer reacted, and let's say the hunt's over, because quite often with doing what we're doing, where we have, we're in deer reduction mode, we're in population control, we might sit and shoot another one. We might shoot 3 more, whatever. It's our job to reduce the deer. But if our hunt is over and everything went well, I'm going to get down and I'm going to get my arrow. I'm going to start inspecting the arrow, because I want to know.
So will you get down immediately? Now, I'm going to preface this. You emphasized if everything went well.
Yes.
So you feel very confident. The deer ran. It gave you every indication that it's a dead deer, and maybe you heard a crash and things like that, right?
Yes.
Okay, then you'll get down.
I still am going to wait about a half hour. I mean, because it's not getting more dead, right? And nothing good comes from going too early. Now, if it's warmer out, where the meat could potentially spoil, that difference in a half hour could possibly cost me food. Well, then Papa Bear is getting on it right away. But yeah, I mean, assuming that the weather is conducive to letting a deer, not spoil in 30 minutes, which is a very small window of when we hunt. I'm waiting a half hour before I get down. I'm going to pack my stuff up. I'm going to, I might even go to the truck and get my kill kit and stuff and dump off a bunch of other unnecessary items before I come back, because again, there's really no harm in waiting unless there are some outside circumstances. Like some of the spots we hunt, if a deer runs towards a road, I'm going to go glass that road real quick. Just make sure that there's no deer dead in the middle of the road.
Or in someone's front yard,
Exactly.
or in an exposed area.
Yeah, because the last thing we want is any negative impact for the surrounding property owners. But yeah, if we're in the middle of the woods and the deer ran off to a thick area and crashes, I'm waiting 30 minutes.
Let's say you make a marginal shot, or you shoot and something just seemed a little bit off.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think through what potentially was off, why it was off, where that shot was. It's always great to have a picture of a deer anatomy on your phone so you can kind of think through, where did I hit this animal? I'm going to look at my arrow, and I'm going to let that arrow and my thought process of where I hit that critter determine how long I wait.
Okay.
So if I have liver or one lung, liver, whatever, I'm waiting at least 6 hours.
What about if it's right in the pooch?
If it's right in the pooper, I'm waiting for at least 12 hours. Minimum.
Or longer.
Definitely longer if able. And so that's where we hit this weird, like, tough scenario between hunting in the suburbs, and what I might do is I might drive around the neighborhood very, discreetly, and just make sure there isn't a deer laying in somebody's front yard, or, the deer's not bedded up in the neighbor's yard, looking around, making sure it's safe, right? But as long as there's no immediate, like, obvious PR issue on my hands, I'm letting that deer wait 12, 15 hours. I mean,
even a day, 20, yeah.
Yeah, because, look, again, the thing's not more dead. You can only screw it up from here, because those animals, if you bump a deer that is fatally hit, like, it's going to die, but it's going to die a mile away, because you've now triggered that fight or flight instinct. Deer aren't fighting you, they're fleeing. And when they have that adrenaline, that is a literal life and death adrenaline dump, their body is doing everything it can to evade that predator. And it's gone, man.
And they know the terrain a hell of a lot better than we do.
Yes.
And they're going to find a much thicker, much, more difficult area to access for us.
Yeah. And deer are able to do some crazy, like, to traverse some insanely awesome terrain. I've looked at hills where I'm like, there's no way a deer went up that.
Deer didn't do that.
Yeah, and then I'm like following the blood, and I'm like clawing up with an ice pick, going like, good God, man. Like it. And
you didn't claw up, you went around.
I did go around. So don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of touched on number 8 also, and it's the sign. So inspecting the arrow, and inspecting any sign that you do see. Let's say you've waited the appropriate amount of time, and a lot of times, I won't even, if it's a marginal shot, I won't even go over to the arrow.
Yeah,
I'll do everything I can. If I know I'm going to back out and wait, I get down as quietly as I can, way after, like hour and a half, as long as I can wait, and I stealthily as I can get out of there and back out. And also, people don't always think about this. You want to get out downwind.
Yeah.
Do not walk upwind of where you think that deer may be bedded, because a lot of times if you hit them back, they don't go more than 100 yards, but they're very alert and they can smell you, and you can spook them just by your scent, just like you can sight and smell.
They will almost always bed within 100 yards of where you shot them, and it is so important to be silent. And that's where you're talking about not even checking your arrow. Yeah, if I hit one in the guts or back and I don't know where it is, checking my arrow does me no good.
Nothing.
I know where
you already know it's back,
and I'm getting out of there. I will leave all of my stuff in the tree and just slowly get out of there, because my stuff's not going anywhere. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to bump that deer. I cannot take the risk of bumping that deer. And we're hunting in a pretty extreme scenario, being the suburbs. Most of these people, the people that are listening to this, you probably aren't. But don't you want to find the deer within 100 yards? Why cover, a couple miles and go knock on neighboring farms that you can't? I mean, like, regardless of where you're hunting, if you hit one like this, back out. You know, if you get to your four-wheeler, just put it in neutral and push it a little ways before you turn it on.
Definitely,
like,
without
do
a
not
doubt,
make
get
it
away.
obvious, because that deer most likely does not know what happened. It was walking. Now it's got a boo-boo. Its tummy doesn't feel good. What's going on? I'm going to go bed down. And unless you give it more of a cause to know that a predator did this to them, they might just think they got, they ate some wrong salad and they're sitting down for a while, right? So it's important to not make any noise to that effect.
So another piece to that arrow and that inspection, you talked about having white fletchings, a white wrap. There's also reflective wraps. There's a bunch of companies that make them. Easy, and there's a bunch of them that. Those are all very, very helpful. Have you seen the gut check indicator?
Yeah.
So that will actually change color and tell you. I think it's almost like it is basically a litmus test, because the pH of the digestive system is higher than the rest of the body, so it'll actually change color for you. So
you can sometimes get some false positives, false negatives, a little bit of a false reading on those white fletchings, because if that animal was hard quartered away, well, maybe if I'm aiming at the exit, I have to put it in the guts or start it pretty close to the guts. There might be a little gut material on there, even though it cleaned the deer out, or, vice versa. But what is absolutely imperative, I think, equipment wise, is a lighted knock.
yes,
Because a lighted knock allows you to see where it went without question. I mean, I literally have like a freeze frame picture in my mind almost every time that arrow is disappearing. And that's where also filming your hunts is helpful for us. But even if you just have like a GoPro strapped to your stabilizer, and it's not something that you want to use to like share with people or put on, a high production value into, it's really pretty helpful to have that lighted knock and watch where the arrow's going. And there've been tons of times I'm like, oh, I smoked that deer. And then I'll go back and watch the footage and I'm like, ooh, that wasn't exactly perfect like I thought. And maybe, everything works out fine, right? But it's just always good to learn from that. And the lighted knock is super awesome to have.
I totally agree. I remember the first time I shot one with a lighted knock, and it was a green lighted knock, and it was in the summertime on damage permit. And I remember everything was super lush and green, and I forgot that I had a lighted knock. That thing went off. It was this beacon of glowing green, and you would think that it would blend in with all these green foliage. No, it stood out even more. It was incredible.
Oh, yeah. Dude, and they are bright, and they burn
awesome
for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely, and totally worth it. The only caveat to that is you want to make sure that you've got enough weight up front that it's not throwing your front of center off on your arrow.
And also, some of the earlier ones that I got, the shoulder of the knock was significantly higher than my practice arrows. And it was creating a lot of knock pinch and a very erratic flight. So I would really suggest to anyone out there, make sure that the arrow knock that you're shooting, if you're shooting a lighted knock, matches your practice knock as closely as possible.
Absolutely.
And you might have to swap your practice arrows out to get them closer to the knock, right? But whatever you're doing, get them as close as possible, because you will only have good things happen because
Absolutely.
of that.
And with the sign that you might find on that arrow, I learned through many deer that we've trailed and we've shot, that if you have an arrow that looks like it was dipped in red, and it's like completely coated, and it's almost like you couldn't have painted it any better, that isn't always an excellent shot.
No.
A lot of times that's liver.
Yes.
Okay. And
especially that darker,
it's
metallic.
Yeah. And it's almost like the consistency. It's like a higher viscosity. It doesn't wipe off as easy. Now, juxtapose that to putting one through the lungs, where we've both shot them through the lungs and the deer piled up and we saw it die within 50 yards, and you go to the arrow and you can barely see any blood on it.
And there's like no blood on the ground.
There's no blood on the ground. It's like there's really not much blood at all. Now you look at that white, you can pick out, you wipe piece of toilet paper or something like that, which we always have to bring with us in the woods, but you wipe something white on that and you can see, oh, well, there is blood on it, because I've shot and gone, oh, I killed that deer. I saw it go through the deer. I go over to it and there's no blood on the arrow. I'm like, what happened?
What?
And I check, and obviously the deer died. But when it goes through the lungs, sometimes there's not a lot of blood. Now, if you go through the heart, it's kind of in between the two.
Yep.
You know, if you hit one of those big arteries, and the lungs and the heart, you're going to have more blood than you would just going through the lungs. But it's definitely not like that painted liver shot.
And also, you know, we've both been on a lot of blood trails for other people where people are like, "Oh, look, I smoked this deer. It's got this like, you know, heart blood," and they're looking at a bright red, bright pinkish blood. But if you have that blood without bubbles in it, that is not good blood. That is muscle blood that is trying to clot, and that's normally always along with a shoulder hit or sometimes like a brisket hit deer. But
or that shot that's like on a quartering away, it's too far forward and it goes in between the rib cage and the leg and it comes out like, yeah. And those bleed like crazy for like 100 yards plus, and then they just peter out and die.
Yep, and that's because the animal has clotted up. And, you know, deer are able to clot insanely quickly. You know, sometimes we've been on deer that we've like smoked that the blood's already clotting on. And you're going like, good gosh. You know, and that's, and I also read a study where deer are able to bed up and slow their heart rate down to allow that wound to clot even faster because it's not pumping blood out at such a high pace, which I thought was really cool.
You know, I've been on blood trails with people before, and it's usually when we're on someone else's blood trail, they're calling us in because there's an issue.
Yeah. We don't get called in for good
it's
things.
like, hey, this deer went 40 yards. Can you come help me track it? No, we don't get called for that. So when they say things like, "Oh, I found a piece of the lung on the blood trail," I'm like, that's not a piece of lung. That's a clot.
Yes.
That is it almost, it's like the consistency of like jelly, or anybody who's field dressed a deer, it's like a chunk of coagulated blood. And that's exactly what it is. So reading that sign appropriately will help you on that blood trail.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. I think number 9 I put down is, I think it's an understated important fact on recovering deer. It's knowing the land, the landowner, and your property boundaries and what's around.
Yeah.
And you kind of hit on this with, is there a road there? Is there a front yard there? Is there a park there? Is there some visible thing? But if you're hunting in the rural areas and it runs out, you know, across a certain field and it goes, you know, off property, how are you going to get to that deer? Now there's different legal ramifications for just following a deer off property and you don't have permission. In our state, you have to contact the landowner to get permission to, and I think that's a best practice anyway.
Yeah, but know the laws of where you're hunting. And, you know, so often I think people get pigeonholed in by property lines. And they're thinking like, you know, you have to think like the deer. The deer have no concept of property lines. There's just, you know, the thicket over there.
Yep.
That's where I'm going to because there's no danger over there.
And I'm crossing the fence.
Yeah,
Just,
it doesn't matter.
Just,
or the cornfield or whatever. And so it's very important to think outside of your property lines, depending on where that animal was hit. But I mean, if you're hunting close to a property line, or whatever your scenario might be, if you didn't make that perfect shot where a deer can run 50 yards and pile up, and even so, you know, if you make a heart shot on a deer, we've seen deer that if you pop just the heart
and don't hit lungs,
they can go a long ways.
Especially at low heart hit.
Yeah, because I think it gets, you know, the heart is still able to function a little, and
then basically the deer has to bleed out.
Correct. Instead of having it suffocate, which it does when you pop that diaphragm. So it's really important to know exactly where you hit. And if you made a perfect shot, everything shows it's perfect, the arrow's great, you watch that knock disappear perfectly, and you've gone more than 50 yards, it's okay. Like, you can keep going in that scenario. But again, like, when in doubt, back out rings so true so often.
And I think we should touch on that too, because when people say when in doubt, back out, it literally means when you go, that's when you're doubting.
Yes.
That is the doubt. That means you stop right there and you don't go, well, maybe I'll just kind of circle
10
here.
more yards. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that is the doubt.
because
So go ahead and back out.
and how many times have we heard from guys that were like, they got to that point and they were like, well, I'll just go another 20 yards. And then they bump the deer.
Yep.
Like, you have a sixth sense inside you. Like, listen to it.
Sure.
Don't override it. And
Right.
if you get to that point where, you think you need to back out, it's because you do.
Yep.
And you need to stop and turn around and leave quietly.
So that, with number 9, I talked about land, using Onyx and things like that. Using Onyx so you can see the land, but then also track yourself. It's literally one button. You can track where you walked. You know exactly where the blood trail is. So when you do have to back out, when you do doubt the shot, you can go right back to that spot and even take the same path, or you go,
I'm gonna go a little higher.
a little higher,
grid search.
yeah,
Yep.
and maybe, and then exactly. It's very difficult to grid search without proof that you did grid search.
And also, to that same point, using a technology like Onyx or any type of mapping feature, when you're out there scouting this time of year in the spring, make note of the thickets. Make notes of the areas that you're finding sheds in. Like, make notes of the areas that are covered in poop where deer are going.
If you find deadheads, guess what? That's a good area that deer like to go to when they die.
Yes.
So if they're hit, you found deadheads. We on the Sick-a-Deer property, we found 2 stags that were killed, and I mean, they died. They didn't die of old age, so most likely they got shot. And they were within 50 yards of each other in an area that no one has hunted in 25 years. So we said, well, this is a spot we know that they feel safe in. So think about that too. Number 10 is persistence with patience.
Very good.
So that persistence means going until you've exhausted literally every opportunity to recover that deer. You've knocked on every door. You've covered every square inch. If a landowner doesn't allow you to step onto the property, you don't just go, well, they won't let me go trail the deer.
Go to the next one.
Go to the next one.
Look for birds.
Call the game warden if someone doesn't allow you to go onto the property. Do everything you have to do. And I've looked for deer before for days, and I knew it was spoiled. Our buddy Adrian, the buck he shot this year, it took him days to find that deer.
Yeah.
And granted, it was, it didn't work out the way that he wanted to, but he did find that deer. That's persistence. He did everything that he possibly could to find that deer. He spent days. He took off work. He did everything to try to salvage, to finish the hunt and not just quit.
You owe it to the animal, right? And you also owe it to yourself to know what happened. And I mean, if you're taking the responsibility of harvesting that animal on yourself when you draw your bow back and you decide to let an arrow loose, you need to see it through to completion.
Absolutely.
And if it takes 2 days, 3 days, a week, whatever it is, you need to get out there and find, that animal. And I think that even for Adrian, where, he did an awesome job putting in the time to find that critter, but now where they go. Now, if that, God forbid, ever happens again, the area that they might go to. Know kind of the process and you're learning the land more.
And you're learning what deer think and how to track them more and more.
It's a rough scenario, but you're getting better because of it. And ultimately, if you take away a little bit of learning every time that you shoot an animal, like that's how you should be trying to grow as a hunter, right?
Absolutely.
Nobody should be just complacent with where they are.
Yeah, you have to make those improvements, so you can become super efficient and a lethal killer. And with that persistence, that doesn't mean to rush. It doesn't mean to, go hard and go fast. You still have to be patient. And that patience not only applies to backing out, it also applies to when to call it quits. Sometimes you just have to go, you know what? I just need a break. I need a mental break. Leave, go get a cup of coffee, go eat a sandwich, get a friend, get some buddies, and then go back and try again.
Yep.
Just be patient with it. Calm down. That I don't want to walk through the bedding area. I'll spook the big buck I was after, but my deer went through there. Well, you know what, that big buck's going to be there next year, or maybe next week or something. You owe it to the deer that you shot to follow that through. But be patient, stay calm, and stay positive with it too.
Yeah.
If it's a lethal shot, you can find the deer.
Yep. Take it slow and just think it through and kind of walk through the process. And I think that you said it perfectly, where you're persistent but patient.
Yeah.
And don't rush into it, because that's where the majority of the deer that we get called in to help on, somebody, made a poor decision. Most of the time they've made a poor shot selection.
Mm-hmm.
They rushed the shot, they hit it where they didn't need to. But where that got 10 times worse was when they pushed too hard too fast and then bumped the deer.
Yep.
And that you can't do. So as long as you're, patient, you can make up for that poor judgment potentially, and then you can learn from the whole thing. But if you go diving in afterwards and that deer blows, you are in trouble.
Yeah, then it's going to be very, very challenging to find. So I think, just to sum up, 10 commandments of doing everything you can.
Every time you say that, I hear Biggie Smalls counting in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's a 10 commandment.
Number 1, have a well-tuned bow.
Yep. And the arrows, tuned bow with good strings on it, you're reducing that potential for failure. Arrows and broadhead.
Yep. Number 2, you have your solid arrow broadhead combo. Number 3, shot placement on the deer. Not taking those risky shots. I think I can sneak this one. I can do that. And then also the number 4 would be the body position and the shot selection, making sure that you have that your proper form in the tree. You don't have obstructions and things like that, and making sure the deer is in the right position to shoot towards that good spot. Or I think number 5 was your form and shooting from your tree stands versus saddles, and then your shot sequence all the way through, making sure that that's dialed in. You're thinking through the process as opposed to the outcome. You don't want to jump to that outcome. Number 6 is, what do you do initially after the shot? You want to take it all in, everything visual and auditory. You want to memorize those things, hone in on those last spots that you saw that deer, and go look in those areas. Use your binos and look for blood on the ground, look for your arrows. Number 7, we talked about the wait times, how to follow up, when to back out. Number 8, the sign that you find not only on the ground but on your arrow. Number 9, knowing the land, using tools like Onyx, knowing the property boundaries and how to follow that deer when it does go off property. And number 10 is that persistence, doing whatever you have to do to find that deer and being patient along the way.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully that's helpful to everybody out there that's listening or watching. And I'd love to hear feedback from people that are listening to this that, maybe they think that there's something that we didn't touch on.
Mm-hmm. Or if there's a topic on here that you'd like to add on, or you want to hear more about sign, or you want to hear more about, shot placement, broadheads, whatever. Let us know. Let us know in the comments, whether it's on YouTube or hit us up on Instagram.
Or our OnlyFans account.
Or our OnlyFans. Oh,
Angie loves me. Yeah, but let us know what you want to hear, what stuff, if you want a deep explanation. Is it flooding? What was that?
I don't know. It sounded like a turlet flushing. Is your dog using the toilet upstairs?
Yeah, he's well trained.
Oh, good.
I had somebody ask me that one time when we lived in we lived in the city for a while, and I remember one time I was walking my dog Wyatt, who was a puppy at the time, and these 2 chicks. It was like 4:00 in the morning, right? 3:30 in the morning. 4
You weren't walking your dog at 4:00 in the morning.
Dude. When he was a puppy, I had to set an alarm to take him out because his bladder was so small he couldn't sleep through the night. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time these 2 chicks were they were messed up. They were not drunk messed up. They were on something. Mm-hmm. And they're like little hippie chicks, right? Mm-hmm. And they were like, "Oh, your puppy is so cute." And I'm like, "Yeah, he bites. Get away." Right? I don't want to be awake. I just set an alarm to take my effing dog out.
I want to go back to sleep.
Yeah, and I remember one was like, "Why don't you just teach him how to use a toilet, man?" And I was like, "Nice talking to you.
Thank you so much. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye then.
Yeah, enjoy your acid trip." But I was like, "No, because it's a dog."
Well, it was Meet the Parents, wasn't it? Where Mr. Jinxie, the cat,
Oh yeah,
did use the
toilet. Yeah, left it running. So, well, thank you guys for listening. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below if you want anything covered, and please also give us ratings and reviews. It helps us out a little bit. It helps us get the algorithm in our favor. So
yeah, definitely share these podcasts with some of your friends, family, anyone who you think could benefit from something like this, especially anyone who lost a deer that drug you out and you had to lose a day of hunting.
Yes.
Send this to them so they can, maybe hear it and take a little ribbing from you.
So now we're going to give a shout out to all of our friends that have made us do that.
You'll see that in the description below.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you soon.
Take care.